All right, everyone. It is Tuesday. We're on another edition of the MSP Initiative Live. This time we bring in a special guest from across the ocean, or the pond, as they say, Mr. Chris Tate. How you doing, Chris?
I'm very good, thanks, George. Very good. A little bit
So,
nervous because I've been looking at your website, the MSP Initiative, and Facebook, and it says that the kind of these conversations should be. I've even written it down: tech leaders or great minds. So I'm guessing it's that kind of end of season. No one else would do it, so let's reduce the normal criteria and get Chris Tate on board. It's
you're,
something
you're
like that.
you're not giving yourself enough credit, Chris. It's all good. So you're in the UK, and I know a lot of our audience is spread out across the world. I know heavily North America bound. So for people who aren't familiar with what's going on overseas, I'd love to hear a little bit about what's happening in the UK. But before you do that, for anyone that does not know you or where you came from or your journey through IT land, why don't you give everybody a little walk through memory lane and explain your journey so that they know how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. Well, it's quite a long journey, so make yourself comfortable, everyone. I started in this industry. I was only thinking about it the other day. It's the only thing I've ever done, the only thing I've ever been involved in. And I started in 1988 as a programmer for digital PDP-11s. So I was writing stock control systems and accounting systems in Diebol for PDP-11. Now, obviously, if you're old enough to remember them, you kind of say they're a kind of a mini computer system. So everyone, you'd have one of these sort of computers in the middle of the office, and then everyone would have kind of green screen terminals or white terminals or digital terminals. And so that we kind of transitioned from PDP-11 onto the PC operating system when Microsoft released Xenix, which came out licensed through SCO and different OEMs. So we kind of moved from mini computers to running still coding, but on Xenix operating systems, then Unix, then NetWare, and then Windows. I guess the sort of fairly common path that everyone went through. But I was still technical at that point. So then I was doing service management, and the company kind of became what's now called an MSP, but at the time it was just a IT support company. So it would charge an annual fee to look after their servers, printers, this kind of thing. I was at the first company for quite a while before I moved to another company called Orchid IT, based in Derby, England. I know you've been over to that way when you came over, George. And they were probably more of a classic MSP. We transitioned them from kind of a break fix to an MSP model. And then Orchid was sold to GCI. GCI were a telecoms company. I don't know, you've probably seen this in the States as well, that there was a period a few years ago where telcos were kind of looking to buy MSPs left, right, and center.
Still kind of happening, I think.
Yeah, a lot of them, they kind of didn't know what to do with them when they got them. So some of them worked better than others. But GCI kind of acquired Orchid. So I stayed at GCI for a while before I left to set up an MSP consultancy business, which was called Totally MSP, which at the time was me going around other MSPs, sort of advising on tool selection and this kind of thing. And I think the reason I did that is, just to take a quick step back, is Orchid were quite early in the process of going down the MSP route. So we were probably one of the first auto test partners in the UK. We used to use Hound Dog, which is now SolarWinds MSP, through a variety of iterations. Then we moved to Enable, which is obviously now SolarWinds and Central. And it was so we built up quite a bit of sort of credibility in being quite early into the market. So that's what my consulting side came. But part of the consulting work that I was doing was with Datto. We're also one of the first Datto partners in the UK. And then ultimately, I kind of got an opportunity to go and work at Datto, which I did and spent sort of 3 years there, pretty much. Probably where I first met you, actually, at DattoCon, one of your parties. And then from there, at the back end of last year, now this is typical timing wise for me, I decided that the travel at Datto was getting a little bit too much. It was a little bit, I know you do a lot of travel, but it was getting to the point that I felt like I was on the road all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I left Datto to cut down on travel, took a few months off, and then everything ground to a complete halt. So this year's been the exact opposite. I've not traveled further than this office downstairs to the kettle to make tea and back up and down again all the time. So it's the travel thing's just not worked out. But in April of this year, I joined Myki, which is where I am now. Myki is a sort of password management 2FA solution. So still very, very much like Datto, totally MSP, Orchid. Everything I've done is within the MSP community. This is all I know, really. It's all kind of meeting people at events, meeting people like you and everyone watching the MSPs. So yeah, I mean, it was a no-brainer. I was going to stay in the MSP space. It was just a matter of finding the right vendor to end up at. So that's kind of where I ended up here.
It is a small sandbox that we all live in, I think. Some people don't realize that, but I've come to realize that a while ago.
It's very, very small. It can seem large, but it's a very, very small segment of a small part of the IT industry. It's kind of it's a tiny segment, even though numerically there's lots of us. You go to the big events like DattoCons, IT Nations, Channel Cons. There seems to be thousands and thousands of people there. So I think sometimes we think it's probably bigger than it is, but yeah, certainly in vendor land it's quite small.
Oh yeah, 100%. So now let's pivot to how are things happening? How are the goings and comings, if you would, in the UK? I know that based on the news, whatever that good that's worth, looks like you guys approved the Pfizer vaccine, so that seems to be starting its progression. I think there was a re-lockdown recently. I don't know all the ins and outs of that. But you talk to a lot of MSPs on a regular basis on either side, right? The consulting side or your position now, Myki. What's the general feeling of things over there?
The position in the UK is slightly mixed depending where you are in terms of what the lockdowns look like. And because it's been based on different tiers, based on sort of prevalence of the virus. You're absolutely right that the vaccination program started, I think, last week, and it's now being sort of rolled out pretty aggressively. So touch wood, hopefully there's kind of a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. I think the problems that MSPs have had, as I would see it, is in the first lockdown, or kind of lockdown 1.0 as we would have called it, or as we just called it then, the lockdown. I don't think anyone knew there was going to be a second one. I think there's a little bit of MSPs were kind of relishing the time. So they did this huge effort to get everyone working from home. So which was monumental, something that we should be really proud of as a community. But then what happened is the support calls kind of dipped because a lot of the end user businesses in the UK, a lot of the staff were sent home on this sort of kind of like a job protection system. So the government was paying the wages. But during that, they weren't allowed to work. So I guess the call volumes coming in to the MSPs was reduced. So it meant that the MSPs had a great opportunity to look at new products. So we were finding there were,
Let me just rewind for a second just to make sure I heard this right. The government assistance program for the companies were that they would pay the wages of the employee, I guess either directly to the employee or through the company's payroll, however it worked. But the caveat was that said employee that was under program just stayed home and didn't work.
Absolutely, yeah. They could, it was 80%, the government would pay 80% of the salary up to a fixed amount. But yeah, the caveat absolutely was that they couldn't work. So in theory, it meant that what they should have done is kind of disable their email accounts and everything because they shouldn't be doing anything. I mean, I guess no one was checking to that level. What they could do was training. So I guess there was forward-thinking companies, what they should have been doing is kind of maybe getting some cyber training or something for their employees. But what it meant ultimately was there were less people working, so that the MSPs probably got less call volume. But I think that a lot of them saw it as a positive. They kind of thought, well, it's a good opportunity to look for new solutions. We've been talking about trialing this for months and months, but never done it. And so I think the first lockdown was pretty well for that. But then things started to get back to normal in the summer when everything was reduced in terms of things started to creep back to normal when the kind of virus went way down. But I think the second lockdown felt a little bit different. I think people were a little bit more apprehensive maybe about it and thinking that maybe there's probably going to be a big knock on next year. So for example, MSPs, a lot of these companies, the SMBs that MSPs look after, which is the primary market, a lot of those employees are kind of still on this kind of job retention program. And I think people are thinking that when that ends in the new year, is there going to be kind of a real high kind of, are these kind of almost ghost jobs that, when the schemes end, those companies aren't going to be able to survive. So I think MSPs have got a challenge because they're still supporting those SMB businesses. They're still doing everything they can. They're helping with them on the bills and all the kind of things that all the MSPs have done really well. But no one really wants to be that guy to go to the customer and say, I've got a new product. Can you give me X amount of pounds extra a month? No one wants to be selling. I think that's the problem. So I guess if you could be offering things to reduce the costs or to save the money, that's one thing. But it's quite a difficult time to pitch a new solution, I'd say, because there's quite a lot of uncertainty around.
Is there, like fast forward 6 months, is there and I forgot to even throw in there's still Brexit that's still being figured out, like literally right now, right? We don't know what the outcome is to that. So like the next 6 months in the UK is really anyone's guess, right? Is there a sentiment that things are going to be better by June, or do we still not know?
I'd say on the COVID side, there's definite sentiment. I think you say that we've got the Pfizer vaccine. There's 2 or 3 different vaccines that are probably going to get approved in the next week, I'd say. One of which is the Oxford vaccine, which can be stored at room temperature. I think one of the logistical problem with fridge temperature. One of the issues with the Pfizer one is obviously the challenge of keeping it so cold. So I think that will help.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So I suspect that by June, I think the virus will probably have gone. I think the issue is what's going to be the knock-on effect on the economy in terms of how that's going to work. And obviously, there is the Brexit effect on the economy as well. So even people that aren't directly involved in exporting into Europe, there is going to be a knock-on effect. So I think it's going to be a challenging couple of years, I think, for the UK economy. But these things happen and they'll get through it, I'm sure.
Well, how does that affect companies? Like there's a lot of software solutions that are sold into the UK, and in your case out of the UK. How does that affect those solutions?
Well, I guess a lot of them are sold from companies that aren't in the UK anyway, or aren't in the EU. So, for example, with Myki, I mean, it's the entity is based in the US. So, to be honest, I don't really know the answer to that. I've not heard a great deal of issues around it with software. It's mainly sort of goods, and so I know there's always continual talk about how services are tracked in this thing, but yeah, so far I've not heard a great deal about that.
Have
I mean,
you?
there may well be problems with imports. I guess could be a challenge for MSPs. You remember at the beginning of lockdown, there was no one could get laptops, webcams, that kind of thing. So there could well be a situation. Lots of PCs are manufactured in Europe. I think HP manufacturer for the European market in France. So I guess there's going to be an issue then potentially getting that equipment into the UK. So there could be kind of hardware shortages.
Have you heard of a lot of MSPs out of the UK partnering with MSPs like in other parts of the world, like in North America, where they've said, hey, we'd want to do more around the clock support, we're skittish about the overseas outsourcing help desk, right? In other countries, the UK is obviously, English speaking very well. They have a good, tech background. Are you starting to see MSPs partnering to kind of offset the support hours coverage wise?
Probably not as much as you would imagine. I'd expect to see more. I think that because there are several companies that we know that kind of offer that as a service to MSPs. And you're right, there is very much a nervousness around that. I think people want to try it to see how it goes. I know there's quite a few MSPs that probably do outsource that to South Africa, but that's on the same time zone, so that doesn't really help them with the 24/7. What it probably does help with is it's still English language, and it's a lot less expensive than the UK. And I think some MSPs probably do it in Australia. I know some MSPs that have had staff or left, or they know people in Australia with other MSPs, they may kind of use those guys to do their other side of the clock, their out of hours support. So I'd say I'm sure it does happen with the US, but I don't know any great numbers doing that.
Got it. Yeah, I've heard it starting to kind of bubble up to the top of the conversation now, because everyone's realized that people working remotely can work well if set up properly. And now they've realized that it's not something where they have to do everything in one city or one metro, one state, one county. They can kind of start to spread out a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that is. I was chatting to someone, I can't know if it was in person or another webinar or whatever, about that very point, and it's really interesting that in the SMB, I guess we look at it from two levels, but at an SME level, where again the businesses that most MSPs support, there's always been this kind of anti-home working thing, because they kind of, what are these guys doing? Are they watching TV all day or whatever? And I think that people now have seen that that's not been the case. Productivity has increased. And then at the MSP level, certainly over here, it was always the case of salespeople, maybe they can work from home, remote engineers can work from home, service desk, we need them to be in the office because they need to work together. That's been proven not to be true as well, because that's kind of worked pretty effectively. And even vendors, I know that looking at some of the sort of vendor job posts, and obviously you recruit as a vendor, in the past it's always been, we're looking for someone to work near our office in New York or Austin or wherever. But now the talent pool, you can look much wider, because you can just say, we're just looking for someone. I don't really care where you are, as long as you're kind of roughly in the same time zone. We know that you're able to, in the same continent time zone, not sort of 1 or 2 hours, you're able to kind of fit in and work. So it's, I think it's really changed that for the better, I think.
I agree. I think like we've been doing that for years. Now everybody's started to realize, hey, it works. And we've been saying, yeah, it's been working for like a decade. So all good. So obviously the current news, again, I don't know how reliable. I think the BBC, is probably what you or your news sources over there. But I'm sure you've heard by now on current event land, since we're about to stumble into cybersecurity conversation, that SolarWinds is in the news. I'm not trying to pick them out of the lineup here, but I mean, it's hard not to run into that name on any outlet, which really highlights, again, cybersecurity, right? And I think a lot of people, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, are kind of, hey, I'm going to do what I can reasonably, but, they kind of just wait for the shoe to drop, right? I mean, it's kind of hard, even when times are good, despite what you just said earlier, right? That now that times are a little bit shaky, people are hard fought to buy new services. But even when times are good, right, pre-pandemic, security was sometimes a hard sell to the small business owner or decision maker, because they couldn't tangibly see the results of it, right? They just saw it as another, add-on that was not necessary. I think that's now a lot harder. I think that the mainstream media has made our case for that not being the case, right? I think cybersecurity is now something you have to start hitting head first. So that being said, what's your opinion now, based on the current climate, based on cybersecurity being in the mainstream? How do MSPs find a way, and how do they position security services to their customers where there's not a very, very uncomfortable conversation about, hey, I don't want to pay for this?
Yeah, it's really tough. And I guess there are probably two different parts to that. The way I'd answer that is, firstly, the SMB businesses that, again, that a lot of MSPs deal with don't want to spend the money. So they don't really understand this. And the MSPs shouldn't really be selling on fear. I'm quite big on not going in and selling on fear and explaining to them that, you need to do this, or this is going to happen. I don't think that's a good relationship with the MSP and the customer. But the other way of looking at it is, you've seen what's happened with the SolarWinds, the sort of Orion breach. And that's massive business. That's sort of government organizations who presumably spend a lot of money on it. So I guess that an SME is probably going to be thinking, well, I can't, if they can't protect themselves with their budget, almost what's the point of me even trying with my budget? So, and I think that could almost be a negative in terms of trying to position security to the SME.
I didn't even think about that, but that's a good point.
Yeah, I think that, and again, I think it's about risk, and I think it's just basically saying to people that in the past they've kind of looked at it and said that these big breaches are probably affecting really large organizations. They've then started to look at things like ransomware and things, which does affect smaller organizations. And maybe there's stuff they can do to protect around that. They look at reports which say phishing is responsible for sort of 90%. So they can probably do things around phishing, relatively low cost solutions, reusing passwords, so password managers can be quite important. Cyber training, we spoke about a little earlier, so getting MSPs selling cyber awareness training to end users. I think a lot of this can help, but I think trying to go to them and saying we can solve the problem when they're watching the news and say, well, smarter guys than you have clearly been unable to prevent this. And there are different things, right? I mean, I guess that I don't know whether anyone knows the source of this kind of infection yet, but it wasn't some guy in his basement just on his own. This is kind of high-end stuff that they're probably not going to be going after the plumbers merchants. It's not in their sort of wheelhouse to do. So I guess the market may fragment. There's obviously the really high-end enterprise stuff, but then the SMB stuff as well. And I think the SMB stuff's probably more around common sense and small.
I think, like what 4 or 5 years ago, right? You walk into a conference when they were still happening, and you started to hear the word SOC, you started to hear the word SIEM, you started to hear the word log analyzer, and that was really expensive, right? Like you weren't spending less than $5,000 a month as an MSP to even start on any of those. But then some of the realization of like the 1.0 security mechanisms weren't working anymore by themselves, right? Just putting an antivirus or an anti-malware or a UTM and password rotation, like, every 90 days, your user has to reset their password. And sometimes that was even a fight. That wasn't good enough anymore, right? And then like this other set of what I call now the common things that you should be doing as an MSP kicked in, right? Whether it is to some of the stuff that you do, right? Multi-factor authentication, right? Not even the text message based one. I'm talking about the over-the-top code based ones, right? Because we found that the text message based one wasn't even as secure as they said they thought it was, and then they had to go a bit further, right? And then like that kind of progressed into, well, everybody's doing a different version of that, right? If you go on the PayPal, they do one. If you go on your bank, they do one. If you go on the Microsoft 365, they do another one. Like it kind of exploded, right? Everybody had a different version of that. And then the other problem was, and it's still the case, very, very simple passwords. The sticky note underneath the keyboard, the sticky note on top of the server. It obviously leads to low-hanging fruit for the bad guys, right? Somebody's trying to get in and figure out if your bank account information's out there. Probably the small business is less prepared for that than the major corporation, right? So if from your opinion, as somebody who's been around the block for a long, long time, what is now this 2.0 standardized security components that you need, right? Not just antivirus, not just malware, not just UTM. Is it, obviously 2FA, more like MFA is important, right? That's probably one of them. What else are we missing?
I'll look at that in a slightly different way, if that's okay, because one of the things that I think is the challenge here is we mentioned it earlier, we work in this MSP bubble. And I don't know what the numbers are, but you think about the numbers of businesses in the US and the UK and across the world that have got IT, because everyone has. But how many of those are not even going near an MSP? It's probably still the majority.
A lot.
And so it's what's happening with those guys. And I think that this security system it comes back to like the vaccination. I was chatting to someone about this morning. It's almost like the vaccination that only becomes really useful when 70% of the population are vaccinated or something. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's the same with the cybersecurity, that it only becomes really coherent as a piece if enough people are using the model. Now, in the UK, they launched a program called Cyber Essentials. You're probably aware of this because you may have done something with it around sort of your software. But Cyber Essentials effectively was a framework and some training that small to medium-sized businesses can do to get them best practice. So it would cover a lot of things you spoke about. So advice on patching and password management. Some would outsource it to an MSP, but effectively it's giving those SMEs a kind of almost a cyber 101 baseline that they should be using. The problem with it is the uptake on that is so low because at the minute it's not compulsory. So it's starting to come in. So if you want to bid for government tenders now, you have to tick a box to say I've got Cyber Essentials. a little bit like ISO for argument. So my sort of passion is the way that we're going to solve this is to try and say, well, that's almost got to be mandatory, that every single SMB business thinks I'm going to I need this certification. And that's because if I don't get it, I'm going to lose business. That'll be the only way to make it happen if there's a financial penalty for not doing it. So if they can do that, then the MSPs can be involved in the rollout of that security, then that baseline would get far wider than what MSPs currently do. But it would be, it wouldn't be earth-shattering tools. It would be exactly what you just described. It would be multi-factor, patching, maybe some phishing detection on email or email scanning. The simple, I think if everyone did the simple things, it would be a lot better off than we are now. But it's just how we're going to get to a point where that becomes a standard.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a big topic of conversation on this side because some of the states are starting to now key in on creating legislation for our industry. But in reality, this isn't just an MSP problem. This is a business problem, right? And so the problem, and then you hear fancy terms like CMMC, which is a cybersecurity standard for the Department of Defense here in the US. You start hearing about all the different security frameworks, right? But when you look at all of those frameworks and you line them up side by side, the majority of what I call median expectation is actually stuff that we should already be doing, right? It's the stuff we're talking about right now. So yeah, you're right. How does it get enforced? I'm scared. It's kind of scary to think that somebody wants to implement it as a law. You always hear there's ways to implement things. Incentivize people or penalize people, right? Maybe.
I think that's the way that they're probably going to go down in the UK. But the stats are it's something like 95% of small businesses don't have it. I guess what people do is they say, well, we want to win this contract, we'll get it, and it's so you incentivize them to do it that way. But the problem is there's not enough kind of to push them to do it currently. That seems until more businesses start to ask for it, and we saw it with ISO, I guess. But until more businesses start to say, are you Cyber Essentials or are you this? Otherwise, I'm going to go to the next guy who is. It's probably not going to have a big impact on it. But I think it's a step in the right direction.
I mean, some of the thought over here is that this is going to be a mandate to get your liability and business insurance coverage renewed. That they're going to force you to do this, kind of like you have to do with PCI and the credit card companies, right? Go through this, kind of questionnaire and make sure that you start to put these pieces in place.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, I mean that is a great way because obviously insurance is something that every business has got, and I think in the UK they've tried something similar, but more on the kind of discount. So I think that when you're looking at your insurance proposal, you can say, well, if you can tick this, I guess it's like saying you've got triple bolts on your door and CCTV. Nominally, you can get a discount off your insurance if you can show you've done these things as well as the physical protection. You've also done them in cyber as well, and I think that maybe that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I'm hearing from a lot of MSPs that on the renewals, it's starting to get exponentially more expensive because they're starting to pay out now on these breaches, right? The ransomware and the cybersecurity, just even data breach, right? Like you have a much more comprehensive law over there. I don't know how that works post Brexit, by the way, with what they call GDPR.
Yeah, we're signed into that in post Brexit as well. So yeah, that's not going anywhere. But yeah.
Okay, yeah,
certainly
we
for the time
don't have anything close to that legislation here, other than California has tried to pass a law that's very similar in nature, and they're thinking that may be the beginning of that type of legislation here in the U.S., where the end users cybersecurity, or online privacy protections now installed. But I mean, it's not really out here yet in a large way. Can you explain to everyone here what that means?
Yeah, you can tell the difference in vendor space because obviously when you do events or over here, you've kind of almost got to have a data usage statement on the booth, and you've got to tell people when they're handing in business cards to win a set of AirPods that they're going into this, that the data is going to be used in this way and this way. So yeah, it makes life a little more difficult, but I guess it's ultimately designed to protect users' data. So it's probably a good thing. It's just you have to kind of get your head around it a little.
Okay. So what's I think everybody understands the challenge of weak passwords, right? But from your view and somebody sitting in your position, why haven't we fixed this problem yet? Why is everybody's passwords not way more hard to figure out than they are right now?
Yeah, I don't know why. I guess I do know why, because people aren't very good at remembering passwords. I think this is the problem. So I think as humans, the passwords that we're being asked to remember are difficult for us to remember, but they're also quite easy to guess if you're a computer. So it's kind of a perfect storm. And so what happens is people reuse passwords, and you're only as secure as the weakest application you use. And there's a whole bunch of applications. So if I go, I know people that probably go to download a game from the App Store, and it may need registration. So they probably put their email address in and the password that they use for their LinkedIn, which they probably also use for their sort of corporate domain. And they'd say, well, there's no risk. Who's going to get any kind of be able to hack me by getting into my Flappy Birds or something? It's kind of, it doesn't matter if it gets hacked. But I think it's the fact that what doesn't compute is the credential stuffing part. And I think that is the single biggest problem, in that reusing the same password means that, one site gets breached. So I don't know if anyone's actually bothered to trace this out, but if you look at the LinkedIn breach, for example, you can then go on the dark web and buy bundles of passwords for all kinds of other services that have never been breached, that have literally just come from people taking that LinkedIn bundle, firing it across another service, and then reselling the positives. So credential stuffing is kind of the big issue. I mean, but 2FA can sort of solve that, but the 2FA adoption is not that high either. So I think it comes down to the convenience thing. I guess it comes down to maybe MSPs, and maybe it needs to be legislation. I don't know, but maybe need to be a little stronger when they're speaking to customers, because every layer of security that goes in probably is making the end user's life a little bit more difficult. I mean, it was easier back in the day when we could all just put password 123 in every application. There's no doubt it was simpler to use as a user, but it was not as secure. So I think that 2FA is a little bit more difficult than not having 2FA, but I think that the MSP's role is to probably explain why it's important to have 2FA. So I just think that's why sort of passwords aren't a great solution. We've been stuck with them for like 50, 60 years. So they're not a great solution. They're probably not going to be around forever, but it's something that we need to get better at and stop people reusing passwords.
Very interesting. So I just got a new cell phone, a new iPhone. And my carrier has a little app here that says mobile security, right? And part of that mobile security app that they just give you is this personal ID monitor, basically a dark web monitor, right? It says, here, give me your phone numbers, give me your email addresses. If we find these out here on the web, we'll flag you, right? So I've had this phone for less than 30 days, and it's now giving me 25 alerts on my either email addresses, one of them, or my phone numbers having been leaked somewhere, and they've found those, on the dark web. So I didn't even know that, right? Obviously, the obvious ones are out there, but 25 different ones. That's a lot. That's a lot of issues out there. That means your stuff's probably out there if you've typed your password into a major provider like a Facebook or a LinkedIn or whatever, Instagram.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
whatever.
And that's why one of the things that we do is, and this isn't a plug, by the way, because I'm not in a position to plug the product, but all I know is that when I joined Myki, I was told that we use G Suite. I know a lot of MSPs use Office 365. Sorry, Google Workspace, Place, whatever it's called now. So we use that. But when I first joined, I've kind of got the password manager, and in there are all of my accounts. So I don't know what my passwords are to anything. So what I don't know, I can't give away. I can't share. I certainly can't reuse, because I've no idea what they are. So when I log into my Google apps across any kind of application on my phone or my desktop, the password's there. It's synced between my devices, but I don't know what those passwords are. And I think that that's probably the solution to this, is to take passwords out of the hands of the users. So don't expect users to make passwords, remember passwords, or kind of share passwords, because then again, they can't write them down on the sort of sticky notes if they don't know what they are. So that's probably the solution.
So one of the problems, other than the really, really complex and long passwords, is password rotation, right? Meaning like you need to have those passwords changed every so often. If you leave a password out there for years, at some point somebody can crack it, right? Like it's a time problem. So how does it work with, how often should passwords be rotated, and how is that something that's been automated, or do you have to trigger something, or how does it work?
I think the advice on that is changing. I mean, it used to be kind of every 30 days or whatever. I think that the advice now is if you don't reuse passwords and they're complex passwords, then you don't need to change them as often. So, I mean, I think the 30 days thing is probably gone. So you can automate it with the platform, but I think you need to do it less frequently than you used to do. And again, you can do it automated, and then those passwords will resync across the platforms. Again, I think the issue with reusing passwords, again, inadvertently, through the best intentions, inadvertently leads to the bad behavior, because it means that people then think, well, I know I've got to change it. So what am I going to do? I'm going to use the same password with a number 1 at the end or something like that, because it just leads to this not lazy behavior necessarily, but that sort of human mind behavior that you think I've got to remember another password. So I think that the advice now is not to change passwords as frequently as we were told 2 years ago, for example.
Okay. And then the other challenge becomes that, I mean, everybody has a different app that they're using for MFA, right? I'm fond of Authy, but that's just the one that I stumbled upon early on. But I have like 40 codes, 40, rotating password codes, that you had to do the QR code and whatever. I think one of the challenges, largely, at least from the MSP's view, on two ends, right? One, when there are shared accounts, right, within the organization, where not everybody has a specific login for themselves, and then now how does that work? And then secondarily, like if there's not some sort of administrative access and their end customer has turned on some sort of 2 or MFA on their account, and they now need to get in to make a change, that's not available. Quick story on this. My operations VP went on vacation back last year to Israel, kind of check out the Holy Land, which is cool. Wish I get to there some point. And he was the one that presses the button for payroll, right? It's literally just run payroll, log in. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I need to do that now. So he sent me his information. I go to log in, and it sends him a message, text message, with the code. And I'm like, well, I don't have that, and he's not accessible right now. How do I pay my people? So after literally jumping through hoops, I could have gone and opened up a bank account faster. Like, these people from the payroll company were like, well, you're not the person that usually does this. I'm like, well, I'm the CEO of the company, right? Like, help me out. And I ended up going to the cell phone provider that we use and literally asked them to give me a new SIM card for his phone, and then put it into my phone to get in, because I couldn't get in. So anyway, that's a huge challenge for MSPs. How do we solve that problem?
Well, that's what we have got covered. That is something that Myki can do. I can tell you that. We can share 2FAs. And I think that is especially a great use case for MSPs in the Office 365 scenario that you described. I've been to MSP offices where they've got 2FA that goes to a phone in the office with, which has got one mobile phone with the SIM in. Like, that was quite handy when everyone was in the office. But now you've got everyone working from home remotely. Who's got the phone? How does they get that from there? So I know that people have done it to use that as a virtual phone and then use some kind of software to email the pins or to do all kinds of fancy things to do it. But with Myki, you could just share the 2FA. So if you've got sort of 4 or 5, all of the techs can share that 2FA and that password for that administrator account. So if they log into that administrator, then the Myki app will authenticate the Microsoft 2FA straight through. So the exact use case you described of someone being out of reach, being in Israel, would kind of be solved with that. So you can share 2FA across the users.
Yeah, I'm not so easy. I'm not so sure it's easy to do what I did, but that was my option at the time. And man, I got it right away after I thought about that.
Yeah, but again, I mean, what you did was obviously cool to get the problem solved. But I mean, I guess that shows the vulnerability in the system, that you can just go out and get another SIM or a virtual SIM or clone that number and pick up that 2FA code and log in that way.
Got it. So Alan Miller just popped in here. A couple messages in the chat. Hey, have HAVEL been pawned? That's basically a website where you can go and type in your email address and see if your stuff's in the dark web. I think that's a free solution. So for anyone out there that doesn't have a little app on your phone that tells you, or not subscribed into some sort of service with your credit card company or something else, might be a good one for you. Alan mentions Authy does something similar where you can move stuff around. I never checked into that, but good to know. He said TOTP is easy. Not sure who does a good job with push notifications. Does Myki do some sort of push notifications with the 2FA?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I'm probably not the person to ask for the technical level, but we could certainly look into that. If you want to pass me the details, I can find someone who can find out. But yeah, absolutely. I think we do a decent job with it. And again, we're not unique, so I'm sure people at Authy can do the same thing or similar things. So yeah.
Now, good to know. And by the way, he corrects me. Have I been pawned? PWNED by a guy named Troy Hunt, which again, free solution out there. Definitely use it. So, yeah. Chris, where do things go from here, right? What's the future? You say passwords won't be around forever. What is the future of this? Is it biometric? Is it retina scan? Is it clicking pictures on the screen? Like where does the future of this go?
Well, I hope it's not clicking pictures on the screen for a start, because every time I log into it will say things like, click on all the pictures of a sidewalk or something. I don't even know what a sidewalk is. So I've got to try and work out, or a school bus. What does a school bus look like? Because they're very American focused, these things as well. And obviously I don't live in America, so it's that makes it difficult. So hopefully it's not clicking on images. I suspect it's going to be biometric or some kind of thing, some kind of two-factor thing. And obviously one of the factors is it's kind of being the human involved. So I guess I think that we're going to start to see a lot more of fingerprints or retina or this kind of thing.
No, 100%.
Watch just started speaking.
Yeah, no, totally get it. So where do things go from here from an MSP community standpoint then? Like the next 12 months is going to be interesting, meaning 2021. I know a lot of people are now really concentrating on 2022, believe it or not. A lot of people have already pushed back their go back to the office from a big corporate standpoint to September of next year. Australia is still closed to outside travel until August, at least until that changes. So what's your gut feel on how things kind of roll out next year?
Yeah, it's changing almost every day, and not for the better. This is the worrying thing. I was kind of thinking the spring, and when the spring comes, I think countries are going to be a long way down their vaccination programs. So I think events will start again. I was looking at the US schedule. I think that things like ASCII events probably go in person from Q2 into Q3. I guess DatoCon is supposed to be in Q2. And you think, well, hopefully we're okay. But then you also said what you just mentioned there about international travel, so there may well begin to be events in North America next year that you can get to, but is it going to be practical to people from the UK to get to? So am I going to be able to get to them, or Australians going to be able to get to them? I think that's going to be more challenging. So as a community, when are we all going to be back together in one place at IT Nation or DatoCon or ChannelCon as a worldwide community? I suspect that may be 2022, sadly, which is killing me because I was desperate to get to DatoCon this year. Miss out on your parties for a start, which is something that we're desperate to get to.
So can you actually leave the UK by plane? Is that even an option right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can. Yeah, there's no restrictions on leaving. I guess it's probably more of the restrictions on where you're going. And there is currently, I think it's changed now to 10-day quarantine requirement when you come back. So you probably have to self-isolate for 10 days. And I think that I think it will begin to ease, but I just think that, I guess even with the vaccination, if you're going to start to think about events, so let's say your parties, for example, they're always amazing fun, the kind of after parties. It's where I saw the biggest pizza in the world, which is kind of my big takeaway memory of that. But you trying to imagine that having those, but saying you've got to enforce social distancing, it's just not. It's either not going to be. It's going to be probably not worth doing because it's just not going to be the same. And so I think the same. I think the same with some of the big channel events. Do we want to do them if we've got to be 2 meters apart from everyone and we can't go to the bar? It's kind of what's the point of the event? So I'm hopeful there'll be stuff next year, but I'm not totally convinced.
No, that's good. That's a good point. Do
But I do
you?
think that locally, I suspect that inside the US, for example, and inside the UK, you'll start to see the events happening again. I think it's probably more the international events that may be the problem.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. Do you see the need for MSP services going up now moving forward? I mean, a lot of people have said, and I'm just repeating it, that this whole thing has forced the agenda for us forward 3 to 5 years. You can't deny it anymore. Being able to work from anywhere is like now a requirement, where before you could get away with more antiquated analog type systems that were running, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing.
Yeah, totally. I think it's going to be, and I'm reluctant to say good because it's a bad situation all around. But I think that when we come out of it, I think MSPs hopefully have shown their worth to the customers that they look after by enabling them to sort of keep running and operational. I think that the security thing, even though, as I was saying, it's probably not quite a straight correlation between, look at the news and look at you. There's a lot of work to do there. But I think that will become more of a focus and people will know that they need to do more. So I think the MSPs will gradually sort of begin to become almost more embedded within their clients, and this probably is a benefit. Not again, wrong phrase, not a benefit, but we're seeing as some of these SMB businesses are probably looking to reduce staff because of cutting costs. Then their IT guy is probably one of those staffs that may be cut. It's probably less expensive to go and work with an MSP. So there probably are upsides to MSPs through all this in the long run.
You actually bring up a good point, which is a real big topic now, that I've been seeing, which is, co-managed IT. And for a while there, for a good part of the last 8 years, that was not really something that came up a lot, right? Like you were either displacing the IT department or the IT guy inside the org, or you weren't. Now there's this collaboration thing that's happening because either A, those departments are maybe cut down a little bit, or B, those people are struggling to keep up with the new technology to facilitate keeping these people running remotely. Do you see that happening on your side as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's going to continue to be a thing, and it may be the fact that you could have an organization, an SME business. Let's say they've got 100 employees. They may have an IT guy who's kind of looking after the general IT, the kind of bigger picture stuff, but then they may have 3 guys looking after the service desk. What they may say is, well, let's kind of outsource a portion of this to an MSP. We'll keep the IT guy who's kind of looking at maybe the project work or the bigger stuff, and then sort of co-managing that with an MSP. So yeah, I definitely see that'll happen.
Interesting. Anything else that pops to mind in terms of, what MSP should be doing now to prepare for next year, right? Like we've been through it now. We understand there's a lot of things that you can't plan for, but there's definitely stuff you can plan for now that we had no idea was going to happen earlier this past year. So what are the top 1, 2, 3 things that they should be doing right now to plan for next year?
I think the first thing I would do is I'd almost just say take a pat on the back and take a break. If you're going to get a chance to take a break in this period, do it. I think it's been a really strange year because we've not been doing the normal travel, but the pressures have been different. I think working from home, I've done it for a while, but working from home is a different kind of pressure because you're always at work. So, I guess from the outside, it looks really cool because you never have to leave the house to go to work. But the other side of the coin is you never leave work. It's like 24 hours a day you're in the office. So if you get a chance to shut the laptop off and spend a few days over the sort of Christmas holiday period, then do that. I'd say that's a cool thing to do. Secondly, I'd say it probably is a good time to start to look at those other solutions that you've probably been sort of toying with. And one of those I would say is end user awareness training. Maybe spend a bit of time trying to maybe put together a program or look at solutions and tools that then maybe you can go to your customer base in January and say, you know, this is what's happening. This phishing attack is a big thing. We're not saying it's going to happen to you, but you know, let's just try these test campaigns on your staff, see how you do, and then see if we can do something to sort of improve that. So I'd probably say cyber awareness training, I think, is going to be really big next year. So maybe it's good to do a bit of work to get ready ahead of the game for that.
No, that's good advice. That's absolutely good advice. You know, Chris, do you, you know, what's the percentage of chance I'm going to bump into you in 2021? 10, 20?
No, 100%.
Okay.
I'm determined. I was chatting to our CEO. We're talking about events next year. If, for example, if there's a DatoCon, I'll be there. If I'm allowed to be there, I'll be there. It's kind of my favorite event of the year for reasons. I mean, IT Nation as well. If I can be there, I'll be there. So I know you will. So if I can be there, I will. Or you know, you come back to this side of the pond again. I'm looking.
I'm excited for it. I'm sure you know, I was actually looking at flights the other day. You know, I was actually talking to a company in the UK. I was like, are they even running flights? Apparently they are. They were running, like, saw a bunch of flights going back and forth from New York to London. I'm like, can you even get on these flights? What's going on? I mean, if they're running them, somebody's got to be on them.
Yeah, well, I'm looking mainly. I'm looking forward to coming over and hearing your tales of driving on our roads again, which was the highlight of the last trip. In fact,
I
can you
wanted
set up a camera in the car this year so you can live stream the journey? Because I'll definitely watch that.
I got to think that I got like 30 tickets on my last rental. I mean, I didn't get charged, so I don't know how that worked. I usually, you know, but I swear with all those, like, you know, what they call the, you know, the constantly adjusting speed limits, right? Where they just decide to change the speed limit on the fly and you didn't even realize
Yeah.
it. I don't like that, by the way. That's not fun. I was half considering, you know, going to a local hardware store and just unscrewing the license plate, but I figured that would have got me in more trouble. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway.
maybe you came out of the fact that because you hired the car and you're overseas, you're probably more trouble than it's worth to chase the tickets. Although you may find that when you step back into the UK, into Heathrow next time, there's going to be someone with a big binder of tickets to give you.
You think so? I hope not. I'll leave you on this story because I think it's hysterical. So I did get pulled over the last time I was in the UK. I was up in Manchester. I made a last second, you know, it was like a Y in the road. I was looking at the GPS. I was like, is it going right? Is it going left? I made a last second flip over. You know, I got pulled over. Literally, you know, once I made that turn, you know, lights went on, got pulled over, and guy pulls me over and he's like, you know why I'm pulling? Or he didn't say no. He's like, is this a rental? Yes. Are you from this country? No. He's like, so when are you leaving? I was like, tomorrow. He's like, so even if I give you a ticket, you're not going to be here to pay it. I'm like, nope. He's like, have a nice day.
Okay, cool.
I was like, okay, that works for me. I wish it was that easy over here.
I might try that next time. I'll just put on your accent whenever I get stopped and see if it works.
I believe I forgot one part where he's like, where are you from? And I was like, the great United States of America or something like that. And he wasn't exactly fond of that, but what are you going to do? Chris, where do people find you online? How do they connect with you? Where should they go to get more information about, I guess, Myki?
Yeah, well, I'm online on LinkedIn, obviously, Chris Tate, Myki. If you want anything on email, it's chris@myki.com. I'd love to hear from anyone. But if you want more information about Myki for MSPs, it's just myki.com/MSP. But any questions, just drop me a line.
And then you also have Totally MSP. You're still doing the consulting side, yes?
Well, no, it's really just a blog now, I guess. So I've still got the site. I've been a bit lazy. I've done a post today and I've done one this week. It's one of those things that one of the New Year's resolutions this year was to post more regularly. It's now got to the last week of the year, and I'm desperately trying to fulfill the requirements. So next year, hopefully, I'll be posting more stuff on Totally MSP. And anything you can do to help, I'm always interested in sort of guest blog posts and that kind of thing. It's not Myki related, it's just general industry stuff. The idea initially was I was going to write when I go to an event, things that I've seen or who I've spoken to. But yeah, it's just a fun blog.
Yeah, next time I get pulled over, I'll record it for you. How about that? That'll be good.
Yeah, do that, yeah.
That happens way too often, by the way. Appreciate you for coming on. Thanks everybody for watching. This whole session was recorded. It will be posted on mspinitiative.com. You can fast forward, rewind, download, whatever you want to do. Appreciate Chris for coming on. Appreciate you for watching. We're coming towards the end of the year, guys. I think we only have one more session this year, which is this upcoming Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern time, New York Standard Time, if that's the way I like to call it. And then we're going to take a break for the holiday. And then we're going to come back to you on the first week of January, which is going to be the 5th of January. And I'm sure we'll have Chris back sometime early next year. And we'll maybe talk more about security, because I'm sure there's plenty more that's going to happen between now and then. Thanks for watching, and keep on following us online. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks for having me. Goodbye.